Ring Rage is pretty terrible. It looks horrible, the gameplay isn't all that good, but it did cause me to look a little bit more into this. And it turns out that the Game Boy game is just an awful port of an arcade game that was released in 1992. I had never heard of the arcade game before, and if it's anything like the Game Boy game, I don't really want to play it. So there's no story going on here, it's just 5 random guys who want to fight in a few arenas across the United States, and they do this for all eternity. There is a championship that they're fighting for in one mode, but it doesn't matter, it doesn't lead to anything, it's just an arcade game where the whole point of it is to beat each other up and eventually, get tired of it and move on to something else. Well, the game does control perfectly fine, it's just not that much fun. It kind of devolves into being a button masher, which isn't something that I really want from a wrestling game. This plays an awful lot like some of the inferior LJN games that were published on the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis, and also on the NES. It's just not that interesting, there's not a whole lot to it. There are only 2 game modes, unless you have all the necessary equipment to play 2-player, and you have some poor sucker who wants to play 2-player. Aside from that, there's not really anything else here. You have 5 playable characters, they have generic names, and they kind of... How can I put this in a nice way? They kind of play and act like, wrestlers from the late 80s WWE or WCW or just any wrestling promotion. It's a bunch of weird gimmicks, and it's... If they had backstories, that might help, but no, it's just 5 generic guys. There is something kind of fun about the controls. Each wrestler has their own finishing move. They've got a few different moves between them, so that's kind of fun. Each wrestler feels just a little bit different. I don't think it really makes it good, but at least there's a little bit of variety in what's going on. The manual can be found online, which is pretty fun. You can see the controls are actually rather complicated, especially for something that just has 2 buttons to it, so they got a lot out of it. It's actually pretty far ahead of what a lot of the wrestling games for the Game Boy were. The problem is it's just not any fun. So you've got this game with pretty decent controls, but there's just not a whole lot going on with the gameplay, and it's just kind of disappointing. There are 3 different ring types, which is kind of fun. You've got 3 regular rings, then one that is essentially a cage match, and then one that's called a chain match or a chain ring. I have no idea what the hell it is or why it's different. It's one of those arenas that just kind of looks like shit. I don't really know how else to describe it. It just looks different from the normal rings, and it's not a cage match. So it's there, but it's just not really... I haven't really figured out why, what's different about it. The game actually has a lot going for it, but most of what it has isn't really all that great. It's a rather shallow experience, with only 2 game modes and a lot of hardware requirements if you want to play with a 2-player. I'm glad I played it, I'm disappointed with it, and I'm glad I never have to play it again. You might be wondering what the hell's going on with the graphics. Well, this is an ugly looking game, and there's a reason for it. All of these sprites are supposed to be digitized actors, much like Pit Fighter or Mortal Kombat. So when it came over to the Game Boy, we got whatever the hell this is supposed to be. That's why all of the character images look terrible, that's why some of the wrestlers look a little weird. Actually, all of them look a little weird. That's why everything in this just looks bad and off. They're not supposed to be sprites. They are supposed to be digitized actors. And the Game Boy could not do that. So you end up with this, where it looks like everything's been chewed up and spit out onto a Game Boy screen. So Ring Rage kind of falls into that category of games like Pit Fighter or the three Mortal Kombat games or anything else that was supposed to have digitized actors in it. Once it got brought over to the Game Boy just could not do that, so everything ends up looking bad. It's not the fault of the developers. They were doing the best that they could. I'm not sure if this thing got rushed or had some kind of time constraints, but yeah, the game just kind of looks ugly. It's not bad enough to where like the hit detection is off or the graphics kind of mess with everything that's happening, but they're pretty awful. Like there's just nothing here that I really want to see anymore, and I played it for way too long. It was just really bad looking. Maybe the next one will look better, but right now this is just kind of an ugly looking Game Boy game. Ring Rage is playable. That's the nicest thing that I can say about it. You can sit down and the controls will do exactly what you want them to do, but there's just not a whole lot to it. After a few minutes, you've basically experienced everything that this game can do. And if you want to play all the different, levels, you can. So you can play a cage match, a chain match, and a regular match, and then you're pretty much done. That's all this game has to offer. And then you can move on to anything else. There's really not much else I can say about this. I didn't like it. I think maybe the arcade game would be better since that's 4-player, and this is only 2-player, and you had a whole lot of hoops that you had to jump through in order to get it to be 2-player. I think the cage match is still pretty cool. I like the way they did it in this game, but yeah, the graphics are not that great. It's very limited gameplay, and it's just not something I would ever want to go back to. Anyway, that's going to wrap things up. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I will talk to you later. Bye.